Hello, Robert Kramer, Kramer Talk again. Here we are for another episode. We're here to talk about the people, processes, lessons learned. People we have on the show are more about what we can hear from them, what they've heard and learned and experienced, and what they've taught people over the course of their career. Today, I have Jon Reed, who has spent many years, 30 years, I believe, in ERP, AI, data. He's an analyst just like myself, started his own company, co-founder. I'll talk a little bit about that. Jon, thank you for being on the show. How are you doing today?
Doing good. I'm ready to be in your ERP and AI hot seat. Let's do this, man.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. You've been in ERP for a long time and you've done a lot of different things. Like when you started in your career and when you were a young man, did you ever think you'd be in the enterprise space like you are today?
To be honest, I did not, because I had some other ambitions around more creative paths. But I did get kind of sucked in, and what eventually happened to me, which was fascinating, was I just kind of realized I'm really going to try to make this field my own. And I met a lot of folks kind of like yourself, although I didn't know you back then, but they were more independent minded and they were doing things their own way. And I was kind of like, maybe I could be a little bit of a free thinker, original thinker in this space and work with other people like that. And it's taken me a long way. And I've really grown to like love the work. And so that's been a really cool evolution for me to see how, even though we talk a lot about enterprise and corporate stuff, we can bring a very independent perspective that turns out to have a lot of value to customers and projects. And so I'm really fueled by that. And that's carried me like a long way.
That's a really good point because I talk about ERP a lot because my experience is around that. And this is kind of like not one of the questions that I was going to really ask you, but it's changed so much in a way that I don't know, it's never been sexy. It's never been exciting. People have even told me in the past, is ERP dead? And I look at them and I'm like, why would it ever be dead? It's something that is so significant to a business. But today it seems that it's a conversation that is more prevalent, more sexy, more exciting. And I love that I have the experience in that because I could weigh into it. Like you just said, that experience matters and we can explain that. But in the past, it was such a system of record. And now that record becomes an opportunity to be actionable. And that becomes exciting to people like you and me because we've been in the business.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I spent a lot of time in ERP and in more recent years, really a true AI geek in the sense that I spent thousands of hours trying to understand this technology better. And we'll see how if I'm successful or not during this conversation. But I was always really drawn to transformation in the enterprise, and I view ERP as sort of one aspect of that. And I'm really interested in the deeper, more provocative questions of how do you create change in your organization? How do you make it stick? And how do you do it at scale? And like enterprise guys like you and me, we think about things like how do you do it securely? And in the age of AI, we also think about how do you get to that ROI where we have to take into account future downstream effects of AI getting something wrong or token costs increasing. Like ROI is really tricky. So it needs folks like us that can kind of push that whole conversation. But the one thing I will tell you about ERP is that I don't know if ERP as a category is going to be around 10 years from now, but I think we're still going to be talking about end-to-end process flows and building composable processes that resemble ERP transactional flows. The one thing I will say though is at this point in time, when I talk about like modern ERP, I think there is such a thing as modern ERP. And I can define it for you if you want, but it's totally different than the ERP that we grew up on. And I think that's one reason, Robert, when you're kind of talking about how people misunderstand the technology, I think they bring a lot of baggage in from the past incarnations of ERP, which frankly were bloated and cost overrun and a little too navel gazing and didn't deliver the full value. I think modern ERP is really different, which is not to say that it's perfect, but there's a modern ERP characteristic that is totally different than the systems that you and I first cut our teeth on.
Well, do you think, and I kind of have written some articles about this, it's more about the operating or the operational platform, which includes ERP,
Yep.
data, AI, governance, and security. And when you put all those together, I believe that's a connected strategy. So are enterprises actually, from your perspective, thinking of it that way, or do they separate them? And should they keep them together?
I think enterprises are realizing that as they get further down this AI path and take some big hits around AI and data, they realize that they cannot afford this siloed ways of working and thinking anymore. The cost of that is just too high now, and it forces them to rethink ERP. And I think you're right about how all those systems and ways of approaching the enterprise sort of plug together to get a result. That's one reason why some of the AI sort of Krishnas or purists don't really understand is that AI really comes to fruition in the context of embedding it with all this other stuff. That's where the value is really being derived. But I would also say, Robert, that when I think about ERP at this point, one thing I often do with customers when I'm doing use case discussions and I like to have these deep dives, I will always ask them about their ERP. How is your system helping you to serve your customer better?
Yeah.
And in the past, ERP users really couldn't answer that question.
Yeah.
If they're running what I consider modern ERP, believe it or not, they usually can answer that
Can you
question.
define that real quick? What you say modern ERP is, just so
Okay. Yeah. So
you say that.
okay. So I think there's a few characteristics of modern ERP. One is it's probably a multi-tenant cloud system, though that's not necessarily 100% the case, but the economies of scale of more standard systems are really important. And so modern ERP takes a very, very careful look at when and how would you ever customize, and the preference in a cloud vernacular is to extend systems and build new applications using APIs and things like that, rather than over customizing systems and creating instant debt. So that's one key thing. Another key thing about modern ERP is much more of a real-time view. It's much less of a batch system. And also it's not the waterfall days of old of this takes 3 years to install and then we're live. It's a constant push towards better service to customers, better service to stakeholders,
Mhm.
extracting that data in real-time ways to help you make better decisions. Continuous improvement and customer success are the mantras of modern ERP. None of this sort of waterfall back, unroll the welcome wagon with 30 consultants, all of that crap. Modern ERP, the consulting ratios shouldn't be more than 1 to 3. I would like to see 1 to 1. And for perspective, in the bad old days, we were looking at consulting ratios of 1 to 20 even on these older school ERP projects. So you got to totally change the time. And of course, AI can help a little bit with those instant configurations as well. Modern ERP is much more connectable, which is what you kind of already got at. You should be able to easily connect that to other process flows and supply chain, CRM, customer facing stuff. You're really going for that end to end operational backbone, in my opinion, which is why maybe the term ERP may go away. But that notion of that end to end operational backbone of your business and how to make that more intelligent and more kind of real time usable by customers, suppliers, that's never going away, in my opinion. I think that's the heart and soul of doing good business now.
And that's the operational platform that we briefly spoke about. But I think that technology has to be careful how you it's forced or used or implemented, or say the word transformation. It should be ERPs or an operational platform is a competitive advantage. It's a differentiator for a business, because you said in the past, was it something that made a company better? It should be used not to be put into a company because you think you need it. It should be used to enhance your processes, to make those processes better, to fill those gaps, not to put it in to be a disruption. And it's been done like that in the past. It's if it's not broken, fine, you don't need to fix it. But if you have gaps, which every company has to have some, that's where you put the technology in to make it more efficient. You're supposed to grow with the same amount of people, not necessarily have to keep on hiring and putting in new technology. But what do you think needs to happen before businesses can trust AI to really be more of And instead of just providing, I guess, insights that agents can make decisions and take action, but what actually has to happen for those businesses can trust that that work can actually be beneficial, going to your modern ERP and being that, I guess, more of that decisional layer, that execution layer, or that, I would say, system of action from the system of record, and being more of an event driven system, which that's where we need to be at. Loaded question.
Yeah, that is a great question. Let me get to one more thing that I want to say, which is another characteristic of modern ERP is that you should not need AI to derive value. So in other words, if you're not already deriving value from your ERP system, then it's not modern by my definition. And also, if you're not deriving value already, then I don't like your chances of deriving value by adding AI. You should already be getting something out of those systems if you're implementing them correctly. And I want to throw the word agility into this too, because what we're really talking about here is not technology, but how the circumstances of global competition have totally changed. Like in almost any industry, you need to be able to churn on a dime, make decisions quickly, change business models quickly. And that's at the heart of the change that's happening. It's not, oh, AI can do this or that. That's interesting, but it's about how can I adapt to market conditions quickly? A modern ERP system can do that. So for example, one great characteristic of modern ERP, you'll talk to companies and they'll tell you, yeah, we're able to acquire companies much more quickly because we can just bring them onto our instance and they set them up really quickly and they're up and running in 3 weeks, 6 months, whatever. Now we can really be acquisitive and focus on growth. Whereas in the past, our systems integration was so intimidating, we couldn't even think like that. I've heard that again and again from customers that I think are taking a more modern approach. Another really good example of that is a company I talked to this spring that every customer they have requires a different business model in the automotive industry, a much more personalized approach to manufacturing. So I was very skeptical. I was like, I'll bet you have to customize your ERP system every single time. And I'm not going to name the vendor because I don't want to do any vendor PR here. But no, in this case, with simple configuration changes, they had a different line of business for each client inside the same ERP system. That's modern ERP. And there's no technical debt there. Now, on the AI part, how does AI fit in? Well, one, really, you talk about when will customers trust AI? I think you have to be a little careful about that because a little bit of healthy distrust of AI is important. It's not something to completely trust, but I take your point, which is at what point can you really operationalize AI at scale and feel like you're doing the right thing and you're not incurring too much business risk and all of that. Well, there's a whole security part of that conversation. That's a long one that you have to check those boxes, obviously, because agents have to have the same permission control and zero trust approach that you take to humans, and most companies don't have zero trust architectures, and we could talk about that for the rest of the podcast. But basically, you have to learn how to contain everything and not give people blanket permission. That goes for agents also, so that's a must. And by the way, if OpenAI and Hugging Face had done that properly, then there wouldn't have been any incidents, and they wouldn't have got all the ridiculous marketing they got out of that incident. But anyway, back to AI and trust. One of the obvious things around that is quality data. So one of the things a modern ERP system imposes upon you is data discipline, and that's going to help your AI, right? And also you want to be able to integrate AI into your workflows, and modern systems, including ERP, will help by allowing you to pull data from those workflows or activate workflows. The best AI systems can activate deterministic workflows that users can trust. So when you talk about trust, part of what vendors need to do is to not get rid of the deterministic workflows inside of ERP systems, but to allow AI systems to access and trigger those workflows that we do trust, that we know are always going to work, right? So part of it is understanding what AI is good at and what it's not. One of the things AI is really good at is assessing the risk inside of your systems. And so you can turn it loose to do that. Another key thing that vendors can do for AI trust is what I call granular autonomy. And by that, I mean, don't just impose upon your customers, oh, now we're going to automate this or that. Give them precise control over exactly how they want to automate different things. Because, for example, you can do things like you could provide the ability to automate transactions only to this maximum dollar amount. And at that point, after that, I want a human review. Or I like to see the ability to do autonomy based on the importance of the customer or client as well, because there may be certain clients where you just really, even one mistake with those clients or one tone deaf email to that client written by AI, no, like that's a VIP client, no. So you need a lot more control. If you start providing customers with those kinds of AI controls, then to your point on trust, they will trust it a lot more. Another interesting one is just evaluation and observability, as well as even an undo characteristic. So you could actually, oh crap, I didn't like what that agent just did, or I shouldn't even have told the agent to do that. I want to undo it. So there's all these different components of trust that all have to work together. The vendors that get all those things right, I know it sounds like a long list, but the thing is, if you can pull that off, it's a totally different kind of AI than the kind of AI that people are complaining about in the workplace today.
Well, it's what the customers need for the outcomes, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about it, data is, we went from the system of record, and I keep on going back to that because data wasn't a necessary need to have it exactly how it's needed today for it to be used in AI. So it wasn't kept at the level that is required to be used by AI. And
Yep.
if you think about, you look at data, you look at governance, and you look at AI, how do you rank them? 1, 2, 3. I think probably governance, because my system cannot be penetrated, no matter what. And then data, because I'm going to need that for everything I do. For it runs, that's the transactional components of my business, and AI is a tool. So if data is presented as this foundational layer, how is this problem being resolved for these companies to actually get the data where it needs to be for what you've said, what I've said, and how do you rank those three? Do you see it the same way, or do you see AI number one? Big
Well, it's
question.
really,
Long
well,
question.
yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think security is always job one.
Yeah.
And I like what you said about governance. I might add platform to that in the sense that you need to think about not just how are we going to have one successful AI initiative, but what is this going to look like when we have 50 or 100? And we need to think ahead to that. A lot of the keys to AI in the successes that I've seen is basically you have to have a little bit of a parallel track where on the one hand you're thinking about how will this scale, but on the other hand you're starting small and iterating, and the things you're looking for example, are things where you do have quality data, things where there is perhaps a lower risk threshold. So for example, like I would advocate not starting in higher risk areas, like for example performance management, or it might be that you wouldn't allow AI to make, you might use it for supply chain planning, but you might not allow it to source materials on its own yet. So you define certain risk thresholds, but you do need to go after pain points. So you can't, the one thing that I don't want people to do is to waste a lot of time with this sort of bureaucratic co-pilot office crap, like, oh, let's try it for email generation and stuff like that. That's just, it's so low value compared to the rising cost of technology. Just forget about that. But find something where you can control the risk, but where it can have real material impact. So, like I said, some of that supply chain stuff is really interesting as far as, and you could start thinking about, okay, we have pretty good data from these two regions. Let's start with these two regions where our data is a little bit better. And hey, can we pull in some real time information from shipping locations in that region, and give our supply chain planners something they never had before in terms of
Never had
visibility
that.
into
Oh,
that.
big
So,
deal.
and also making recommendations, right? So they might not do actions yet, but the AI might make some recommendations. So in addition to saying, hey, the AI might alert you that this particular port or plant is moving slowly and more than unexpected, you want to be able to say to the system, well, what do you recommend? And you want the system to be able to say what you want to do and why. And one thing we didn't touch on before is explainability. Like it's really important for people to have explainable AI, and by that I mean if an AI is recommending 3 alternative routes for that supplier, you want to be able to click on each of those things and see the details and see where it came up with that information. And that is doable if you get the right AI architecture. Now, without getting too geeky, an LLM cannot do that. But the way we do that is through what's called context engineering, where we are pulling in data from trusted systems and essentially feeding that into the LLM to do these planning assessments. But because that data is being fed from perhaps a vector database or a knowledge graph, you can also trace that back. And so you can see the areas where the data was pulled from, which has really been one of the breakthroughs with enterprise AI is in particular is really focusing on that trusted external data feeding into the context for the LLM, but also providing that explainability as a result of that. And the other thing the enterprise is really honing in on is verifying things. So in other words, the guardrails inside of large language models are a little bit quirky and not that effective, as we saw from this OpenAI system that goes out and accesses the internet when it wasn't supposed to or whatever. Like those guardrails aren't that good, but what you can do is you can create semi-deterministic engines that verify the output. So for example, if you want your AI to post something to the general ledger, you can force the verification of that against itself. So you can say, does it match an invoice? Does it match an accounts payable here? If the numbers match, then you can post it. Or if it doesn't exceed a certain threshold, as we discussed before in terms of cost. So there's ways of mitigating some of the mistakes. But again, it's a gradual thing and it's not going to happen overnight.
That's true. So if you rank, do you feel that AI is more of a tool and that governance and data are above that?
Yeah, I think, well, okay, so AI is more than a tool, but yeah, I think I put data and governance higher. And the reason for that, Robert, and we see this a lot, especially in smaller and mid-sized companies, where the modern ERP system becomes a quote unquote single source of truth. And that's a very powerful architecture. Now, in large enterprises, it's very hard to get to a single source of truth with your ERP because there's so many regions and so much going on. But in smaller and medium-sized operations, it's achievable. And what that does though is it's not just for AI, it's also for analytics, it's for dashboards, it's for predictive modeling and different kinds of AI, not just agentic AI. So that's the beauty of the data platform, is that it feeds all kinds of use cases, including things like digital twins of your manufacturing operations, which is another arguably form of AI, if you want to call it that. So the point is, like, the data thing doesn't just feed agentic, it feeds all this other stuff. But the reason that AI is more than just a tool is because if you just treat it like a tool, which I hear sometimes from my more cynical or practical friends, what they're missing there is when the board comes knocking and says, what's our AI strategy? Yep. And then when you say to your board or your leadership, well, AI is just a tool for me, they start thinking, who else can we hire that understands AI better than this person? And then you're posting your availability on LinkedIn, which is not where you want to go. You need to be proactive on your. Sorry, Robert, go ahead.
No, it's still a tool though, just because someone says what's your strategy. But
yes, but you need the strategy and the tool, right?
Exactly.
So you treat it like a tool, but you're proactive about the strategy, because you want to be respected internally inside your organization as someone who knows this technology inside and out and knows strategically how it applies to your areas. And by the way, that can include areas where you shouldn't use the technology as well, or where it needs very, very controlled human approvals or whatever. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you're all in on AI all the time kind of thing, but you need to be able to explain, here's what it's good for and here's what it's not.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you've written a lot about all this stuff, and also you've written about the enterprise buyer. I always think, just because I come from the other side of the street where I've worked with the customers so much and I understand the vendors, and I'm trying to explain to both that there's a big gap and that the vendors are having to really implement new technology on a regular basis because the competition, because it's there, because it's evolution, right? And we talked about that at the beginning, how it's a new change for ERP, but the buyers can only adapt as quickly as they need to, and their processes the gaps that are there. So the buyers are changing the way that they're looking at what value is. And so how would you say that they're changing mostly from all these perspectives, and how they're influenced by vendors or analysts like us or enterprise media? Because that value is the big deal. Because if you run a manufacturing facility, you care nothing about anything except your business, about production, about fulfilling your sales orders, about making sure your inventory is exactly what it needs to be. That's where AI comes in to be a gigantic tool to picking the right vendors to work with, the way that you're going to do your supply chain. These are all huge. How do I pick the right vendors to support that with this new era of technology? Because this, to me, is the reason we're all here. From that perspective, what do the customers need to be more successful with what's available?
A great question. So I'll throw out a few things. I mean, one thing is, I think a change that I've seen, and I wrote about this in the book I did on informed buyers, is customers have better BS detectors than they used to, which is good. And the reason for that is because information is just so much more accessible. Like, it's not, obviously they can ping people like you and me on LinkedIn and get a fresh perspective whenever they want, but they can also just go into AI search and say, my vendor just told me this, is that BS or not? And the AI will give them a summary of that, and they might see a Reddit thread saying this vendor sucks, and they can go drill into that and see why. You can't control the narrative anymore as a vendor, even though a lot of vendors still want to pretend that they can, which is like amusing. So that's one thing that helps buyers, but still there's so much information out there that it can be tricky to make sense of it, which is why I encourage buyers to always cultivate a trusted network of diverse voices around them that are expert but have different takes, but can help them contextualize their industry and their situations. That's really important. The second part, as you alluded to, is I think that buyers are disrupted in a way they've never been before. Like 10 years ago, you could legitimately argue that vendors were overselling transformation as a way to get people to buy technology.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think people just feel inherently disrupted by the instability of the global economy and the need to evolve their business models. So you don't really have to sell change very hard anymore. People, I think, generally understand that they have to make changes. But here's the catch, though. That doesn't mean they're saying, oh, we're going to jump headlong into AI. What they're saying is, help me solve my most pressing business problems. And whoever can help me do that is going to get my business. So to your point around inventory, let's say you're having inventory visibility problems that are hurting you from a planning perspective and an e-commerce perspective and all of that. Who are buyers going to work with? They're going to work with people that they trust that can help them solve that particular problem. And my view is they're going to push away from people who are just pressing AI all the time. I think they're going to want to talk with people who can say, all right, well, here's what we've done for other competitors in your industry. Here's the big mistakes you're going to run into. And here's how new technology can help, but you also have to change your organization in order to accommodate it. I think it's going to be that kind of a industry focused approach. And by the way, we can help you build new stuff using these tools as well, because I think building is a big part of this. People want to talk all the time about automation, but I think building new stuff is just as important. And so vendors that can help them take advantage of the ability of AI to create new IP in their industry, I think is going to be huge. So those are the things I kind of really look for from a buyer perspective, but I also understand why buyers might feel a little overwhelmed right now as well. And so I would just encourage buyers to just find those trusted voices and then find those places where you can move and like we discussed, and then have that parallel track of planning your big picture architecture, but realize you don't have to transform your entire data landscape all at one time to do this.
I agree. You can go from 0 to 10 versus 0 to 100. You don't have to move as quickly as everybody wants you to. So as ERP and data and AI are becoming more connected, we talked about the platform and more of an operational platform. I think it's an operational platform and an ecosystem. But what should business and technology leaders, these customers, be measuring to determine whether these investments are actually improving their organization? Because when you look at all this, you have to, it's all measured by outcome. All these vendors talk about their features and capabilities. It's meaningful to the vendor, but whatever that customer is looking for, that's all that's what's meaningful. It's the outcome. If the technology, if I don't change my technology, but I use more technology than I did the year before, I'm still winning. I don't have to be changing regularly, adding new technology that's a new feature. I could be reinventing my features that I haven't used already. So it's a matter of how do we measure the success? Is it inherent already? Is it new? Is it all that together with the data, the AI, and the ERP connected? What should these business leaders look for from their investments? I guess kind of a loaded question there, but they already have existing technology. They might not have already seen improvements, so they could reshape those features. I mean, most companies are only using 50% of their ERP system. So they already have some of the technology and they're going out to look at the shiny red car when they already have it in some cases. So we'll close.
Well, that's a fastball over the plate. It's not an easy pitch, and it's a good one too, because like I can't tell companies exactly what it is that they should measure, because I think that's a very company specific thing. But I can give you some examples. And the one thing that I will really say about your question that I love is you got to start these projects, whether it's AI, ERP, whatever. You need to establish your metrics going in, not
Yes.
on the fly. You need to decide. And by the way, that means a mutually agreed upon way to do that amongst those that are involved, your service provider, your vendor. I've been a longtime advocate that we need like a shared customer success, real-time project thing monitor where we can all look and say, here's the metrics we agreed upon. How are we doing? Of course, eventually AI might alert you when you're having trouble with certain metrics. The biggest problems in the historical ERP project failure world, and there's been a bunch of them, when you read them, they always went way far downstream before anyone seemed like they came up for air and figured out there was a problem. We need to be monitoring this stuff all the time so that we can achieve our outcomes, but also mitigate our problems. That's the other piece of that, right?
What do you think you won? If you strategize, you won before you start.
I think so, especially if everyone agrees on what they're going to try to measure and why. Now, sometimes it's really hard to measure all the important things, but I will give you some examples. So for example, I saw a couple of service AI use cases where people said, well, we put in AI for service and we operationally efficient. We not as much headcount on level 1 service, and our CSAT scores didn't go down. Well, I had a bit of a problem with that, because my idea is you should have the best service in your industry. And so your CSAT scores shouldn't stay the same. Don't pat yourself on the back for that. They should go up.
Yeah.
The whole point is use technology to make service better. And I can't tell a customer that. If a customer wants to just be operationally efficient in service and reduce headcount, that's their choice. But I'm going to advocate to say, be better than that, because my guess is that you're not Amazon and you're not Walmart. And so you might want to compete on superior customer service and value. That's just a suggestion, right? So measure on that outcome and say, we want our CSAT scores to go up. That's just one example of a metric you might use. But I would say you need growth measurements, not just operational efficiency measurements. And so you need to be able to say, how did this help us grow market share in various ways? That's really important. And I would argue too that employee morale metrics are really, really important. I'm a big advocate for employee experience, whatever the hell you want to call it, because I think when you meet companies with happy, engaged employees, you usually run into successful companies. And so people say, well, how do you measure morale? Well, actually, there's a whole bunch of great sentiment tools out there now that can do that. But also, even if you don't want to get that sophisticated, you can look at things like attrition rates. I've seen metrics around the increased hiring of employees inside new positions, new roles in the same firm, for example. And by the way, AI can be really useful at that once you get your skills ontology in a good place, which is another data area you could focus on if it's pretty good, where you're starting to recommend new skills, new roles to employees, and that's really good for morale. So I think there's all kinds of things you can measure But the key thing is, instead of taking my advice and saying, Jon Reed says, no, sit down with the people that you're going to do the project with and get on the same page with that early on. I can't tell you how many customers I talked to this last year that really didn't have clear metrics of what they wanted to accomplish. And they just wanted to get rid of old systems or whatever, which is a good thing, getting rid of old systems if you can get a business case for it. But measure stuff.
You have to have a measurement to where you're going and you work your way forward. So,
and course corrections. That's the whole thing. Make these course corrections all the time. These are hard projects. Don't delude yourself on that. Like, the margin for error of a successful project is still pretty small.
It is. Well, Jon, thank you very much for being on the show. KramerTALK, Robert Kramer, Jon Reed. Again, thank you, everyone. We'll see everyone next time. Thank you very much.